The sun dipped low the quiet coastal town, casting long golden streaks across the cobblestone streets, and the sleepy waves lapping gently against the shore. Victor had walked these streets countless times in his life. Yet today, every step felt different, almost weighted with anticipation he couldn't name. At 50 years old, he had seen the world from heights few could imagine. Boardrooms, luxury vacations, accolades, and honors. But none of these had touched the corners of his heart that ached quietly, invisibly. Loneliness was not merely a shadow in his life. It was a constant companion, a whispering reminder that despite all he had achieved, something essential had eluded him. And then, by chance or fate, he entered the gallery that afternoon, the wooden doors creaking as if warning him that nothing would ever be the same again. Elena stood by her paintings, each brushstroke alive with emotion, each color telling stories she had yet to fully understand herself. She was 20, vibrant with a curiosity that made her laugh spill like sunlight. She had grown up surrounded by art, yet it was only here in the quiet intimacy of her own exhibition that she felt truly visible. Her friends had warned her about being too drawn to strangers, about the perils of flirtation, about the warning society whispered in hushed tones, but she had never felt the weight of such caution. Not until that day when she saw him. Victor's eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the gallery with precision that came from years of experience. Yet when they landed on Elena, the precision faltered. She was a contradiction of innocence and depth, of laughter and thoughtful gaze, and she stirred something within him he had long buried under responsibilities and societal expectations. He felt the faintest quiver in his chest, a ripple of emotion that reminded him of a time long ago, when life had promised possibilities unbound by convention. He stepped closer, careful not to intrude, yet drawn by an invisible force that tugged at the very core of his being. Their first words were polite, almost ceremonial in their politeness, but beneath each syllable lay unspoken tension, a magnetic pull that neither wanted to name aloud. "These are remarkable," Victor said, gesturing toward her collection. "You capture not just what you see, but what you feel." His voice was deep, resonant, carrying a timbre that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. Elena tilted her head, a curious smile brushing her lips. "Thank you. I suppose I try to see the world not just as it is, but as it might be." Her eyes, wide and unguarded, held his gaze for a moment longer than polite conversation demanded. There was a spark there, a recognition, a silent acknowledgement that they both understood something unspoken. Victor's mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts he had not expected. At 50, he was supposed to be measured, rational, guided by experience. Yet Elena stirred a reckless part of him he had long ignored. He wondered at her life, at the vibrancy of her youth, at the boundless energy that seemed to radiate from her very being. And yet, there was wisdom, too, a maturity in her gaze that contradicted her age, leaving him simultaneously fascinated and cautious. For Elena, the encounter was intoxicating. She had never felt drawn to someone so dramatically different from herself, yet she could not deny the allure of Victor's worldliness, the story she imagined behind his quiet, contemplative expression. She wondered what it would be like to walk through life with someone who had seen so much, who had survived challenges she could scarcely imagine, and who now looked at her not with judgment but with genuine curiosity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they lingered by her artwork, discussing inspiration, color palettes, and the strange magic of creation. The gallery faded around them, the outside world disappearing into soft hues of sunlight and shadow. Every glance, every subtle shift in posture carried meaning, and neither of them could ignore the subtle, mounting tension. It was a delicate dance, this careful proximity, where each word and pause seemed to teeter on the edge of something forbidden yet irresistible. As the afternoon waned, Victor realized he had lingered far longer than he intended. He excused himself, though the thought of leaving pressed heavily on his chest. "I must go," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but I hope our paths cross again." His voice betrayed a vulnerability he rarely allowed to surface, a silent plea masked beneath sophistication and charm. Elena nodded, her heart pounding in a rhythm she could neither control nor ignore. I hope so, too," she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook, the one where she had secretly begun sketching a figure from the corner of her eye, a man who had appeared in her life and shifted everything. Victor left the gallery, stepping back into the sunlit streets, yet he did not feel relief or closure. Instead, every step away from her felt like an ache, a tug at the heartstrings he thought had long been silenced. He replayed their conversation, every inflection of her voice, every fleeting expression, every laugh and glance. It was as if the world had narrowed to the memory of her presence, and suddenly, the prospect of ordinary life seemed unbearably dull. Meanwhile, Elena returned to her small apartment, the sketches on her notebook capturing not just his image, but the swirling emotions that had left her restless. She traced the lines with trembling fingers, unsure why a stranger had stirred such intensity within her, questioning the morality of her fascination, yet unable to quell the fire that burned quietly in her chest. Her mind wandered, imagining conversations that had not yet happened, imagining moments she might never experience, yet longing for them with a desperate, almost painful yearning. The evening stretched long and quiet, yet sleep eluded both of them. Victor sat in his hotel room, staring at the dark waves beyond the balcony, imagining Elena's laughter, the tilt of her head, the spark in her eyes that had caught him unprepared. He pondered the impossibility of it all, the age gap, the societal expectations, the inevitable complications, but still a stubborn, unyielding hope took root in his chest. Elena, lying in her modest bed, could not shake the memory of him. Every brushstroke she had painted seemed inadequate to capture the complexity of her feelings, the mixture of admiration, intrigue, fear, and desire. She felt alive in ways she had never known. Yet the awareness of potential disaster that could follow gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. Despite this, the thought of never seeing him again filled her with an inexplicable emptiness, a hollow ache that made her chest tighten. And so, the night settled over the coastal town, both of them awake in different spaces, yet bound together by a thread invisible to the outside world. Neither could name it yet, but something profound had begun, a connection that defied logic, morality, and reason, something that would, in time, change their lives irreversibly, driving them into emotions they could not control, decisions they could not fully comprehend, and consequences they would come to regret. The first chapter closed not with conclusion, but with a lingering promise of what might come, a promise heavy with desire, tinged with danger, and shadowed by the knowledge that love, when it crossed boundaries, could be as intoxicating as it was destructive. For Victor and Elena, the seed of fascination had been planted, and though the soil of their hearts was untested, the roots were already beginning to grow, strong, unrelenting, and impossibly intertwined with the fate that awaited them both. Morning arrived slowly over the coastal town, the sky painted with pale shades of pink and gold as waves whispered softly against the shoreline. The world seemed calm and ordinary, yet inside two separate hearts, something restless had begun to grow. It was not loud or obvious. It was quiet, subtle, almost secretive, but it was powerful enough to change everything. Victor had barely slept. Throughout the night, he had paced the floor of his hotel room, occasionally stepping onto the balcony to stare at the dark horizon where the sea disappeared into shadow. The sound of the waves should have soothed him, yet his thoughts refused to quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, Elena's face appeared, her laughter, her curious eyes, the way she had looked at him without judgment. It had been years since anyone had looked at him that way. At 50 years old, Victor had grown accustomed to a certain kind of attention. People respected him. They admired his success. Some envied him, but very few saw him as a man with feelings, dreams, and vulnerabilities. Elena had, and that realization unsettled him. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples slowly as the early sunlight crept into the room. "This is foolish," he murmured to himself. What was he thinking? She was 20, a girl who had barely begun her life. Victor had lived through decades of experiences, failed relationships, career battles, disappointments, responsibilities. His world was complicated and heavy with history. Elena's world was still light, full of possibilities, full of innocence. He had no right to enter it, and yet the memory of her smile refused to fade. Across town, Elena sat cross-legged on the wooden floor of her small apartment, surrounded by sheets of paper, sketches, dozens of them. All of them were of the same person. Victor. She hadn't planned it. The first drawing had come almost unconsciously the night before. But once she began sketching, she couldn't stop. Each line of his face fascinated her. The strength in his jaw, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the faint sadness that seemed to hide behind his calm expression. There was something about him that felt real. Most boys her age were loud, impulsive, obsessed with trivial things. Conversations with them felt shallow and repetitive. But Victor had listened, truly listened. When he spoke about art yesterday, it had not sounded like empty compliments. He had understood her emotions behind the paintings. That alone had shocked her. She stared at one of the sketches quietly. "Why am I thinking about him this much?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed suddenly. It was her best friend, Maya. Elena answered. "Good morning, artist," Maya said playfully. "Did the exhibition go well?" Elena hesitated before replying. "Yes, it did." "Just yes?" "That's suspicious," Maya laughed. "Something interesting must have happened." Elena bit her lip. "Well, I met someone." "Ah." Maya's voice instantly grew excited. "Finally, who is he? A handsome student? A musician? A photographer?" Elena stayed silent for a moment. "Not exactly," she said slowly. "How old is he?" Elena exhaled softly. 50. The silence on the other end of the call lasted several seconds. 50? Maya repeated. "Yes." 50 as in 50? "Yes." Maya groaned loudly. "Elena, please tell me you're joking." "I'm not." "What is happening to you?" Maya said in disbelief. "That man is 30 years older than you." "I know," Elena replied quietly. "And you still sound interested." Elena didn't answer, because she was. Meanwhile, Victor walked through the quiet streets toward the art gallery again. He had tried convincing himself not to go. He had even attempted focusing on work that morning, opening his laptop several times. But every email felt meaningless. Every document blurred in front of his eyes. Eventually he gave up. His feet had carried him here almost automatically. The gallery door stood open. His heart began beating faster. He stepped inside slowly. The familiar scent of paint and wood greeted him. And there she was. Elena stood near the same corner as yesterday, adjusting one of her paintings. For a moment, Victor simply watched her. The sunlight falling through the tall windows illuminated her hair, creating a golden halo around her head. She looked peaceful, free, young. The contrast between their worlds suddenly felt overwhelming. He should leave. He almost turned around. But then Elena noticed him. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. And then she smiled. That smile erased every logical thought in Victor's mind. "You came back," she said. Her voice held genuine warmth. Victor walked closer slowly. "I suppose I did," he replied with a faint smile. "I thought you might have been just a passing visitor," Elena said. "Perhaps I was. And now—" Victor paused. "Now I'm not so sure." They stood there for a moment, both slightly nervous. But this time the conversation flowed more naturally. They spoke about Elena's university life, her dreams of becoming a professional artist, her childhood memories of drawing in notebooks during long, boring classes. Victor listened carefully, fascinated by the way she described the world. Then she asked about him. "What about you?" Elena said, "What was your dream when you were 20? Victor chuckled softly. "That feels like another lifetime. But you must have had one." "I wanted to build something meaningful," he admitted. "A company. A legacy." "And you did." "Yes." "But you don't sound happy about it." Victor looked at her, surprised by the observation. "You're very perceptive," he said. Elena shrugged lightly. "Artists notice things." Victor leaned against the wall beside her paintings. "Success can be strange," he said quietly. "People assume it solves everything. And it doesn't?" "No." Elena studied his expression. "You seem lonely." Victor didn't answer immediately, because she was right, and hearing the truth spoken so gently made his chest tighten. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly moved across the sky. Hours passed without either of them noticing. Eventually, Victor glanced at his watch. "I've kept you here all day," he said. "I didn't mind," Elena replied. Victor hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. "Would you like to have coffee?" Elena's heart skipped. Part of her knew this was dangerous, but another part of her felt irresistibly curious. "I would like that," she said. A small cafe near the ocean became the place where their connection deepened. They sat by a window overlooking the water. For the first time, their conversation moved beyond polite topics. Victor spoke about his past relationships, his divorce, the years he had dedicated entirely to work, the emptiness that followed success. Elena listened quietly. In return, she shared her fears about the future, her struggle to be taken seriously as an artist, her feeling of being misunderstood by people her age. Somewhere between those conversations, a fragile emotional bridge formed. Two lonely people from completely different generations suddenly understood each other. As evening approached, they decided to walk along the shoreline. The sunset painted the sky with deep orange and crimson colors. The waves reflected the fading light, like moving glass. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. They simply walked. Victor finally broke the silence. "Elena, yes. You realize the situation is complicated." She nodded. "Yes. The difference in our ages alone could cause many problems." "I know." Victor stopped walking. "And yet you agreed to come with me." Elena looked at the horizon. "I did." "Why?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because when I talk to you, I feel like you actually see me." Victor felt his heart tighten painfully. He had expected curiosity, maybe admiration, but not this. This emotional honesty frightened him. "Elena," he said quietly, "you deserve someone closer to your age." She looked at him again. "Maybe, but I want to decide that for myself." The wind carried the scent of the ocean around them. Victor stared at her, torn between desire and responsibility. He knew he should step away. He knew this could become destructive, but the warmth in her eyes made resistance almost impossible. As darkness slowly covered the sea, the two continued walking side by side. Neither realized at this simple moment, a walk by the ocean, marked the beginning of a relationship that would soon spiral into something neither of them could control. Something intense, something emotional, and eventually something tragic. The days following their walk by the ocean unfolded with a quiet intensity that neither Victor nor Elena had anticipated. What had begun as a chance meeting in an art gallery slowly transformed into something deeper, something heavier, something that both excited and frightened them at the same time. Victor returned to the coastal town several times that week. At first, he told himself it was because of business matters that still required his attention. There were meetings he could attend, contracts he could review, partners he could visit. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He came back because of Elena. Each morning, he woke up thinking about her voice, her curiosity, the way her eyes lit up whenever she spoke about art or life. Her presence had stirred emotions he believed had disappeared long ago. For years, Victor had lived in a predictable routine. Wake up, work, meet clients, attend business dinners, return to an empty home, sleep, repeat. His life had been structured, organized, and painfully quiet. After his divorce nearly 15 years earlier, he had slowly built walls around himself. Relationships seemed exhausting and temporary. Love felt unreliable, so he stopped trying. But Elena had broken through those walls without even realizing it. Her laughter, her questions, her innocence, they all carried a kind of energy that Victor had forgotten existed. And every time he saw her, he felt something strange inside him. He felt alive again. Across town, Elena experienced a completely different emotional storm. At 20 years old, life was supposed to be simple. Her days were meant to revolve around classes, art projects, late-night conversations with friends, and dreams about the future. But ever since Victor entered her life, her thoughts had become tangled with questions she couldn't easily answer. Why did she feel so comfortable around him? Why did his presence make her feel safe? Why did his attention feel so meaningful? Elena had dated boys her age before, but those relationships had always felt temporary. Conversations were shallow, plans were uncertain, and emotions often felt exaggerated rather than sincere. Victor was different. He listened carefully. He remembered small details about her stories. He spoke about life with calm confidence, like someone who had already traveled through many storms. And somehow, that made Elena feel protected. The two began meeting more often. At first, it was harmless. Coffee after Elena finished her classes, a short walk through the park, lunch at small restaurants where nobody knew them. But with each meeting, their conversations grew more personal. Victor began telling Elena stories from his past, about the early days of building his company, about the sacrifices he had made to achieve success, about the mistakes he regretted. One evening, while they sat in a quiet cafe watching the rain fall outside the window, Victor finally spoke about the most painful chapter of his life. "My marriage ended when I was 35, he said quietly. Elena looked up. "What happened?" Victor stared at his coffee for a moment before answering. "I worked too much," he admitted. "I believed success would fix everything, but success only made the distance between us larger. Did you love her?" Elena asked softly. Victor nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. And now—" Victor smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. "Now I suppose that life belongs to another version of me." Elena studied his expression. For the first time, she realized that Victor's calm personality was not just maturity. It was experience, pain, lessons learned through loss. And something inside her wanted to comfort him. "You don't seem like a man who deserves to be lonely," she said gently. Victor looked at her, surprised. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he said something that even he hadn't planned. "Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to appear." The words hung between them in the quiet cafe. Elena's heart began beating faster. Neither of them spoke about the meaning of that sentence, but they both understood it. Meanwhile, Elena's friend Maya had started noticing the changes. Elena had become distracted during conversations. She often checked her phone with a smile. Sometimes she seemed lost in thought. One evening, Maya finally confronted her. "You're still seeing that man, aren't you?" Maya asked. Elena hesitated before answering. "Yes." Maya sighed heavily. "Elena, this isn't a good idea." "Why?" "Because he's 50 years old. So he has lived 30 more years than you." Elena crossed her arms. "That doesn't automatically make him a bad person." "That's not the point," Maya said. "People will judge you. They will assume things. I don't care what people think." Maya looked at her seriously. "You might not care now, but eventually their opinions can destroy relationships." Elena remained silent. Deep down, she knew Maya was trying to protect her, but emotions were stronger than logic. Meanwhile, Victor was fighting his own internal battle. Every time he spent time with Elena, the attraction between them grew stronger. He admired her curiosity, her imagination, her ability to see beauty in ordinary things. But he also knew that their relationship existed in a dangerous space. Society would never fully accept it. People would question his intentions. They might accuse him of manipulating her youth. And perhaps the most frightening possibility was this. What if Elena eventually realized she deserved someone younger? Someone who could grow old with her? The thought terrified him. One evening, Victor invited Elena to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the sea. The atmosphere was calm. Soft music played in the background. Candlelight flickered gently across the table. Elena arrived wearing a simple blue dress. Victor noticed immediately how different she looked outside the casual environment of cafes and parks. For a moment, he simply stared. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Elena smiled shyly. "Thank you." Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed naturally. They laughed. They shared stories. They spoke about dreams. But beneath the surface, something deeper was growing. Something neither of them could ignore any longer. After dinner, they stepped outside onto the balcony, overlooking the ocean. The night air was cool. The moon reflected across the water, like a silver path stretching toward the horizon. Victor leaned against the railing. "Elena," he said softly. "Yes." "I want to ask you something honestly." "Okay." "Why are you still spending time with me?" Elena looked confused. "Because I enjoy it. But you must realize that this relationship could become complicated." She shrugged lightly. "Life is complicated." Victor sighed. "You should be dating someone your own age. Someone who can share the same stage of life with you." Elena looked directly into his eyes. but I don't feel the same connection with anyone else. Victor's heart pounded heavily. He had tried to create distance, but her honesty made it impossible. "Do you understand what you're saying?" he asked quietly. "Yes." "Then say it clearly." Elena took a deep breath. "I like you, Victor." The words echoed softly in the night air. Victor closed his eyes briefly. He knew that moment had changed everything. From that point forward, their relationship could no longer pretend to be innocent friendship. The emotions between them were real, strong, and dangerous. Victor finally spoke again. "I like you too." Those 4 words sealed the beginning of something powerful. But neither of them realized how deeply those emotions would eventually transform into obsession, conflict, and tragedy. For now, all they felt was excitement, hope, and the thrilling belief that they had discovered something rare and meaningful. But sometimes the most beautiful beginnings hide the seeds of disaster. And the story of Victor and Elena was only just beginning. Time passed more quickly than either Victor or Elena expected. What had begun as occasional meetings slowly evolved into a regular part of their lives. Days without seeing each other started to feel strangely incomplete. Conversations that once lasted an hour now stretched late into the night. Victor began rearranging his schedule in ways he never would have imagined before. He extended his stay in the coastal town again and again, finding new reasons to delay his return to the city. Business meetings that could have easily taken place elsewhere were suddenly scheduled nearby. Even Victor's assistant noticed a change. "Sir, you've been spending a lot of time in that town recently," she mentioned during a phone call one afternoon. Victor paused before responding. "Yes, it has become a place I enjoy." That explanation sounded simple, but the real reason was far more complicated. Elena had quietly become the center of his attention. Meanwhile, Elena's life was also shifting. At first, she continued attending university normally, but gradually, her priorities began changing. Whenever Victor asked if she wanted to meet, she almost always said yes. Sometimes that meant leaving campus early. Sometimes it meant skipping classes entirely. The excitement of their relationship made everything else feel less important. Victor introduced Elena to places she had never experienced before. Elegant restaurants, quiet wine bars overlooking the ocean, small art galleries in neighboring towns. Each new experience felt magical to Elena. She admired Victor's knowledge, his confidence, and the way he spoke about life as if he had already solved many of its mysteries. But with every step deeper into Victor's world, Elena slowly drifted away from her own. Maya noticed a change immediately. One evening, she confronted Elena in her apartment. "You missed 2 classes today," Maya said sharply. Elena looked up from her sketchbook. "I'll catch up." "That's not the point," Maya replied. "You've been disappearing constantly." "I've just been busy." "With him," Maya said bluntly. Elena remained silent. Maya sighed heavily and sat across from her. "Elena, I'm worried about you." "There's nothing to worry about." "There is," Maya insisted. "You're letting this relationship take over your life." Elena closed her sketchbook. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Elena hesitated before speaking. "Victor makes me feel like my dreams matter." Maya frowned. "Your dreams always mattered." "Not like this," Elena said softly. "When I talk to him, I feel seen." Maya shook her head slowly. "That feeling can be dangerous when it comes from the wrong person." Elena's expression hardened slightly. "Victor is not the wrong person." But Maya wasn't convinced. Rumors had already started spreading around the university. Students had noticed Elena being picked up by a much older man in expensive cars. Some whispered about it out of curiosity. Others judged harshly. A few even laughed about it. One afternoon, Elena overheard 2 students talking near the art studio. "That's the girl who's dating the rich guy." One of them said quietly. "She must really like money," the other replied with a smirk. Elena pretended not to hear them, but their words stung deeply. That evening, she met Victor at his apartment. He immediately noticed her mood. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Elena hesitated before answering. "People at the university are talking about us." Victor remained calm. They were always going to talk eventually. "I didn't expect it to happen this fast." Victor stepped closer and placed his hand on her shoulder. "You can't control what others say." "But it still hurts," she admitted quietly. Victor looked into her eyes with seriousness. Elena, if this relationship ever becomes too difficult for you, you should tell me. She shook her head immediately. No, you don't even know what I was going to say. Yes, I do, she replied softly. You were going to suggest we stop seeing each other. Victor didn't respond, because she was right. Elena stepped closer. I don't want that. Victor studied her expression carefully. You're certain? Yes. Victor sighed slowly. The truth was that he didn't want to end the relationship either, but he had hoped Elena might choose that path herself. Instead, she seemed more determined than ever. In the following weeks, Victor's behavior began changing in subtle ways. He became more protective of Elena. He didn't like the idea of other men flirting with her. He often asked where she had been and who she had spent time with. At first, Elena interpreted this behavior as affection. It made her feel valued, important. Victor also began buying her gifts. Small things at first: books about art, expensive paintbrushes, rare sketching materials. But the gifts gradually became more extravagant. A designer dress, a new tablet for digital art, even a delicate necklace that Elena had admired in a jewelry store window. You shouldn't spend so much money on me, she said once. Victor smiled faintly. I enjoy seeing you happy. Elena hugged him tightly. Moments like that made her believe their relationship was special. Something rare. Something worth fighting for. But not everyone saw it that way. One evening, Victor and Elena decided to have dinner at a popular restaurant in town. It was the first time they had appeared together in such a public place. As they entered, several people immediately noticed them. Some whispered. Others stared openly. The atmosphere became uncomfortable. A middle-aged couple sitting nearby looked at Victor with obvious disapproval. Elena noticed the looks but tried to ignore them. Halfway through dinner, she finally spoke. They're judging us, she said quietly. Victor remained calm. Let them. But it feels like we're doing something wrong. Victor reached across the table and took her hand. We're not. His voice was steady and reassuring. But deep inside, Victor knew the situation was far more complicated. After dinner, they walked along the dark beach. The waves crashed softly against the sand. Elena wrapped her arms around herself as the wind grew colder. Victor placed his jacket over her shoulders. Elena, he said softly. Yes. No matter what people say, I won't abandon you. Elena looked up at him. Promise? Victor hesitated for a brief moment, but then he nodded. I promise. Elena smiled with relief and hugged him tightly. At that moment, she believed those words completely. But promises made in moments of passion often carry consequences no one can predict. And somewhere deep within the growing intensity of their relationship, the first real seeds of disaster had already begun to take root. Neither Victor nor Elena could see them yet, but the future was slowly moving toward a storm neither of them would be able to escape. By the time autumn arrived in the coastal town, the relationship between Victor and Elena had evolved into something far more powerful than either of them had expected. What had once been curiosity had turned into attachment. What had begun as excitement had become dependence. Their lives slowly began revolving around each other in ways that made stepping back increasingly difficult. Victor no longer pretended that his extended stay in the town was related to business. He had moved many of his meetings online and delegated responsibilities to his team. His assistant had stopped asking questions about his unusual schedule, but she could sense something had changed in him. Victor had become distracted, more emotional, sometimes even restless. Whenever Elena was not with him, he found himself checking his phone repeatedly, waiting for her messages. The man who had once controlled international negotiations with perfect composure now felt anxious over a simple delay in communication. It was a strange transformation, and Victor himself didn't fully understand it. Elena, meanwhile, had drifted further away from the life she had known before meeting him. Her university attendance had become irregular. At first, she missed occasional lectures, then entire days. Eventually, some professors began noticing. One afternoon, she received an email requesting a meeting with the department advisor. The message was polite, but firm. Her academic performance had dropped significantly. Assignments were missing. Deadlines had passed. Elena stared at the screen quietly. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she closed the laptop. Instead of going to the meeting, she went to Victor. He noticed her troubled expression immediately. "What happened?" he asked gently. Elena sat on the couch and looked down at her hands. "The university is worried about me." Victor remained silent. "They think I'm losing focus," she continued. Victor sat beside her. "And are they wrong?" Elena didn't answer, because deep down she knew they were right. Victor took a slow breath. "You worked very hard to get into that program," he said carefully. "I know. And your art means a lot to you." "Yes." Victor hesitated before speaking again. "Then maybe we should create more balance." Elena looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You shouldn't sacrifice your future for our relationship." The words sounded responsible, mature, but Elena reacted differently than Victor expected. She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Elena looked up at him with an intensity that surprised him. "When I'm with you, I feel like my life has meaning," she said softly. Victor felt his chest tighten. Elena continued speaking. "All my life people told me to follow a path. Study, graduate, find a job, build a career. And that's not what you want?" Victor asked. "It's not enough," she replied. Victor watched her carefully. "What do you want then?" Elena took a deep breath. "I want a life that feels real." Victor suddenly felt uneasy. He had expected affection, maybe admiration, but this level of emotional devotion was something far more serious. Meanwhile, Elena's friend Maya had reached the end of her patience. One evening she arrived at Elena's apartment unannounced. "Elena, we need to talk," she said immediately. Elena sighed. "I already know what you're going to say." "Then maybe you should finally listen," Maya replied firmly. They sat across from each other in tense silence. "Elena, you're destroying your future," Maya said bluntly. "I'm not." "You are," Maya insisted. "You're missing classes. You're isolating yourself. And for what?" "For someone I love." Maya stared at her in disbelief. "You think this is love?" "Yes." Maya shook her head. "This is dependency." Elena's voice became sharper. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Maya said firmly. "That man has already lived half a century. When you're 40, he will be 70. That doesn't matter. It will matter eventually." Elena stood up angrily. "You're supposed to support me." "I am supporting you," Maya replied. "I'm trying to protect you." But Elena had already made up her mind. "You don't understand our relationship," she said coldly. Maya's expression softened with sadness. "Maybe not, but I understand where this path leads." The room fell silent. Finally, Maya stood up. "If you keep going like this, one day you'll regret it." And with that, she walked out. That moment marked the beginning of Elena's complete emotional isolation. Victor slowly became the only person she relied on, the only person she trusted. Weeks later, Victor made a decision that would unknowingly push the situation even further. He rented a small house outside the town near the cliffs overlooking the ocean. It was peaceful, private, and far from curious eyes. One evening, he brought Elena there. She stepped onto the balcony and gasped. The view was breathtaking. Waves crashed against the rocks below, and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "Victor, this place is incredible." Victor smiled. "I thought you might like it." Elena turned toward him. "Why did you rent it?" Victor hesitated briefly before answering. "So we can spend time together without the whole town watching." Elena hugged him tightly. For her, the house felt like a romantic escape, but in reality, it represented something more complicated. Isolation, distance from the world, distance from reality. Over the following weeks, Elena spent more and more time there. Eventually, she made a decision that shocked even Victor. One evening, she arrived with a small suitcase. "What's that?" Victor asked. "My things," she replied. Victor looked confused. "What do you mean?" Elena smiled softly. Winter arrived quietly along the coastline, bringing colder winds and longer nights. The waves crashing against the cliffs became louder during storms, and the skies often remained gray for days. Inside the small house overlooking the ocean, Victor and Elena were living a life that seemed peaceful on the surface. But beneath that calm exterior, something had begun to change. When Elena first moved into the house, everything had felt magical. The morning started with sunlight spilling through the large windows. Elena would drink coffee on the balcony while sketching the ocean. Victor often watched her from inside the kitchen, smiling quietly as he prepared breakfast. Those early days felt almost perfect. They spent long hours talking about art, life, dreams, and the future. Victor introduced Elena to books and music she had never explored before. Elena painted more frequently than she ever had at the university. At least, that was how things began. But slowly, reality began entering their world. Elena's old life had disappeared faster than she expected. Without university classes or regular contact with friends, her daily routine became increasingly centered around Victor. At first, she didn't notice the change. But over time, small things began to bother her. Victor started asking more questions about where she went whenever she left the house. "Where are you going today?" he would ask casually. "Just into town," Elena would reply. "For how long?" "Maybe an hour or two." "Who will you meet?" The questions seemed harmless at first, but they became more frequent. Sometimes Victor would suggest accompanying her, even when she only planned to buy art supplies or walk to the market. One afternoon, Elena decided to visit a small art gallery in town alone. When she returned, Victor was sitting in the living room waiting. "You were gone longer than you said," he remarked calmly. Elena set down her bag. "I lost track of time." Victor nodded slowly. "Did you meet anyone there?" The question caught her off guard. "No, why?" Victor shrugged. "Just curious." Elena studied his expression carefully. "Victor, do you think I'm hiding something?" He quickly shook his head. "Of course not." But the tone of his voice suggested otherwise. Over the following weeks, Victor's behavior became more intense. He didn't like the idea of Elena going into town alone. He often reminded her how many people had judged their relationship. "Some people might try to interfere," he said once. "Interfere how?" Elena asked. "They might try to convince you that what we have is wrong." Elena frowned slightly. "People already tried that. And I ignored them." Victor nodded with satisfaction, but something in Elena's chest tightened. Meanwhile, Victor's fears were growing stronger every day. Sometimes he watched Elena while she painted near the window. Her youth seemed almost luminous. Her laughter still carried the lightness of someone who had many years ahead of her. And Victor couldn't stop thinking about the future. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What would happen then? Would Elena still want to be with him? Or would she eventually realize how much of her life she had sacrificed? These thoughts haunted him constantly, and the fear of losing her began affecting his behavior. One evening, Elena mentioned something casually during dinner. "I saw an art workshop poster in town today," she said. Victor looked up. "A workshop?" "Yes. A famous painter is visiting next month to teach a small group of young artists." Victor remained quiet. "I was thinking about joining," Elena added. Victor placed his fork down slowly. "How long would it last?" 2 weeks. "And where?" "In the city." Victor felt a sudden wave of discomfort. "That's quite far. It's only 3 hours away." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Do you really need that?" Elena looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You already paint beautifully." "That's not the point," she replied. "Artists need to learn and grow." Victor stared at the table. "And you would stay there for 2 weeks?" "Yes." "With other artists?" "Of course." Victor's jaw tightened slightly. Elena noticed a change immediately. "Victor, what's wrong?" He hesitated before answering. "I just think it's unnecessary." Elena blinked in surprise. "Unnecessary? You already have everything you need here." Elena's expression slowly hardened. "Everything?" Victor nodded. "Yes." The word hung heavily in the room. For the first time, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced before. Restriction. That night, they argued for the first time since their relationship began. "Elena, you don't need to travel to prove anything," Victor insisted. "It's not about proving something," she replied. "It's about growing. You can grow here." "No," Elena said firmly. Growth requires new experiences. Victor stood up from the table. And what about us? Elena looked at him carefully. What about us? Victor's voice grew tense. If you go there, you'll meet people your age. Elena frowned. Victor, that shouldn't matter. But it does, he replied. Why? Victor finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding. Because they belong to your world. The room fell silent. Elena stared at him in disbelief. Victor, are you afraid I might meet someone else? Victor didn't answer immediately, but his silence revealed everything. Elena stood up slowly. I gave up my university for this relationship, she said quietly. I didn't ask you to do that, but I did it because I believed in us. Victor ran his hand through his hair in frustration. And I appreciate that. Then why are you treating me like someone who might betray you? Victor didn't know how to answer, because the truth was complicated. He trusted Elena, but he didn't trust time, or age, or the future. Later that night, Elena sat alone on the balcony, staring at the dark ocean below. For the first time since she moved into the house, a strange feeling crept into her heart. The place that once felt like a romantic escape now felt different, quieter, lonelier, almost like a cage built from love. Victor watched her through the glass door from inside the living room. He wanted to go outside, to apologize, to hold her, but he hesitated, because deep inside he realized something terrifying. He was no longer just in love with Elena. He was afraid of losing her, and fear had slowly begun transforming his love into something far more dangerous. Outside, the cold wind moved across the cliffs as the waves continued crashing endlessly below. And somewhere between the silence of the night and the growing tension between them, the relationship that once felt magical was slowly becoming something neither of them could control anymore. The storm that would eventually destroy everything had already begun forming. They simply couldn't see it yet. The silence inside the seaside house became heavier with every passing day. After their first serious argument, Victor and Elena tried to pretend that everything was normal again. They spoke politely. They shared meals together. Sometimes they even laughed. But something had changed. A quiet tension now existed between them, lingering in the background of every conversation. Victor could feel it. Elena could feel it. Neither of them knew how to fix it. The house that once felt warm and romantic now seemed strangely cold. Even the ocean outside sounded different, its waves crashing harder against the cliffs as winter storms approached the coast. Elena spent more time alone on the balcony, sketching the gray horizon. Her drawings had changed as well. The vibrant colors she once used were now replaced with darker tones, deep blues, sharp blacks, heavy shadows. Victor noticed the difference. One afternoon, he stood behind her quietly while she painted. The canvas showed a lonely figure standing near a cliff, surrounded by a vast, empty ocean. Victor studied the image. It's beautiful, he said softly. Elena didn't turn around. It's lonely. Victor felt a knot tighten in his chest. Is that how you feel? Elena paused for a moment before answering. Sometimes. Victor sat beside her. I never wanted you to feel lonely here. I know. Then why do you? Elena finally turned toward him. Because I gave up everything to be here. Victor looked down at the floor. Her words were honest, but they cut deeply. I never asked you to sacrifice your life, he said quietly. But I did, Elena replied, because I believed our love would make it worth it. Victor didn't know how to respond. The truth was painful. Their love had once felt powerful enough to overcome any obstacle. But reality had begun to expose the cracks beneath that belief. Over the following days, Elena found herself thinking more about her old life, her university, her classmates, even Maya. She hadn't spoken to her best friend in months. One evening, Elena sat alone in the living room scrolling through her phone. Her finger hovered over Maya's name. She hesitated. Then she pressed call. Maya answered after the second ring. Elena? Her voice carried surprise. Hi, Elena said quietly. There was a brief silence. I wasn't sure you would ever call again, Maya admitted. Elena felt guilt rising in her chest. I'm sorry. Maya sighed softly. I was worried about you. Elena leaned back against the couch. I think you were right. Maya didn't respond immediately. About what? She asked carefully. About everything becoming complicated. Maya's voice softened. Elena, are you okay? Elena looked toward the dark window. I don't know. A few days later, Elena made a decision she didn't tell Victor about. She took a bus to the city. It was the first time she had left a coastal town alone since moving in with Victor. The city felt overwhelming at first. Crowded streets, loud traffic, young people rushing through their daily lives. Elena suddenly felt like she had been away from the world for a long time. She met Maya at a small cafe near the university. When Maya saw her, she immediately hugged her tightly. I missed you, Maya said. Elena smiled weakly. I missed you too. They spent hours talking. Elena told her everything. About the house by the cliffs. About Victor's growing jealousy. About her doubts. Maya listened patiently. Finally, she asked a question Elena had been avoiding. Do you still love him? Elena stared at her coffee. Yes, she said softly. Then what's the problem? Elena hesitated before answering. Love doesn't always mean happiness. Meanwhile, Victor was waiting at the house. At first, he assumed Elena had gone into town for supplies. But as the hours passed, his concern grew. He called her phone several times. No answer. By evening, his worry had turned into anxiety. When Elena finally returned late that night, Victor was standing near the door. Where were you? He asked immediately. Elena froze. In the city? Victor's expression darkened. The city? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Elena set down her bag. Because I knew you would react like this. Victor felt anger rising in his chest. You disappeared for an entire day. I just needed space. Victor's voice became louder. Space from what? Elena looked directly into his eyes. From this life. The words hit Victor like a sudden storm. What does that mean? Elena took a deep breath. It means I feel trapped here sometimes. Victor stepped back as if struck. Trapped. Yes. You chose this life. I know, she said quietly. But choices can still feel heavy. Victor ran his hand through his hair in frustration. So what happened in the city? I met Maya. Victor's jaw tightened. That friend who hates me. She doesn't hate you. Then why does she keep telling you to leave? Elena's voice grew firmer. Because she's worried about me. And are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena hesitated. Victor noticed, and that hesitation broke something inside him. You're starting to regret this relationship, he said bitterly. That's not true. Then why do you need space? Elena's frustration finally erupted. Because I'm 20 years old, Victor. The room fell silent. Victor stared at her. I gave up my university, Elena continued. I gave up my friends. I built my entire world around you. Victor felt his heart pounding. And now you're saying that was a mistake? I'm saying it was a huge change. Victor's voice became quieter. So what happens now? Elena looked toward the window where rain had begun hitting the glass. I don't know. Outside, a storm had started moving across the coastline. Thunder rumbled in the distance as strong winds shook the house. Victor suddenly felt an overwhelming wave of fear. Fear of losing the one person who had brought light back into his life. Elena! Please don't walk away from this, he said softly. But Elena was already grabbing her coat. I just need time to think. Victor stepped forward. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Thunder cracked loudly above the cliffs. The wind howled through the night as Elena opened the door. Victor stood frozen as she stepped outside into the storm. The rain immediately soaked her hair and clothes as she walked toward the road. Elena! Victor shouted, but she didn't stop. The door slowly swung closed behind her. And in that moment, Victor realized something terrifying. Their love story had reached the edge of a cliff, just like the one outside their home. And the fall that awaited them might destroy everything they had built together. The storm that had been gathering all evening finally broke open across the coastline. Rain poured from the dark sky in relentless sheets, carried by violent winds that howled across the cliffs like a warning from nature itself. Lightning illuminated the crashing ocean below, revealing enormous waves slamming against the rocks with terrifying force. Elena walked along the narrow road near the cliffs, Her coat soaked through within minutes. She hadn't planned where she was going. She only knew she needed distance. Distance from the house. Distance from the suffocating emotions that had built between her and Victor. Her heart was pounding as she walked, not only from the cold wind but from the storm inside her mind. Every memory of the past months rushed through her thoughts. The first meeting at the gallery. The conversations that lasted for hours. The magical feeling of discovering someone who seemed to understand her completely. For a long time, she had believed that connection was strong enough to overcome anything. But now she wasn't so sure. Love had brought them together, yet it had also taken things away from her. Her independence, her future plans, her sense of belonging in the world she once knew. And Victor had changed too. The confident, calm man she first met had slowly become someone driven by fear. Fear of losing her, fear of time, fear of the inevitable differences between their lives. Elena wiped rain from her face as she continued walking along the dark road. Behind her, far in the distance, the headlights of a car suddenly appeared. Victor. The moment Elena left the house, Victor stood frozen for several seconds. At first he believed she would return within a few minutes. But when the storm intensified and the empty road remained silent, panic finally gripped him. He grabbed his car keys and rushed outside into the rain. The drive along the cliffside road felt endless. The wind pushed violently against the vehicle, and visibility was barely a few meters ahead. Victor's heart pounded harder with every second. "Elena," he whispered repeatedly. Images of losing her forever filled his mind. The thought was unbearable. Suddenly, through the rain-covered windshield, he saw a familiar figure walking along the side of the road. Victor slammed the brakes. The car stopped several meters ahead of Elena. He jumped out immediately. "Elena!" he shouted. She turned slowly. For a moment, they simply stared at each other through the storm. Victor walked toward her, rain pouring down his face. "What are you doing out here?" he asked desperately. "I needed air," Elena replied quietly. "In the middle of a storm? It matches how I feel." Victor shook his head. "Please come back." Elena looked toward the dark ocean below the cliffs. "I don't think I can." Victor felt his chest tighten painfully. "Elena, we can fix this." She turned back toward him. "Can we?" Victor hesitated. "Yes." "How?" she asked. Victor struggled for words. "We just try harder." Elena shook her head slowly. "That's not a real solution." Victor stepped closer. "I love you." The words were raw and desperate. Elena's eyes filled with tears as rain continued falling around them. "I love you too," she whispered. Victor felt a moment of relief. "Then come back." But Elena didn't move. "Love isn't always enough," she said quietly. Victor stared at her in disbelief. "We built an entire life together." "Yes," Elena replied softly. "But maybe it was never the life we were meant to live." Victor felt as if the ground beneath him was collapsing. "Don't say that." Elena looked toward the road stretching into darkness. "I think we forced something beautiful into a shape it couldn't survive." Victor grabbed her hands desperately. "Please don't walk away." But Elena gently pulled her hands back. "I need to rediscover who I was before all of this." Lightning flashed across the sky. For a brief moment, the entire cliffside illuminated in bright white light. Then everything returned to darkness. The wind grew stronger, pushing violently against them. "Elena, the road is dangerous," Victor said urgently. "Then you should go back." "I'm not leaving without you." Elena turned to continue walking. But the road's surface had become dangerously slippery from the heavy rain. As she stepped forward, her foot suddenly lost traction. For a split second, everything happened too fast. Elena slipped. Victor lunged forward instinctively, grabbing her arm. But the momentum pulled both of them toward the edge of the wet road. The ground beneath Victor's feet shifted. Loose gravel slid toward the cliff. "Elena!" he shouted. She clung tightly to his hand. The ocean roared violently below them. For a terrifying moment they hung there, balanced on the edge of disaster. Victor tried pulling her upward, but the rain-soaked ground kept crumbling. "Elena, hold on," he gasped. She looked into his eyes, and suddenly something calm appeared in her expression. "Victor? No!" Don't say anything, he pleaded. But Elena's voice was soft and steady. I'm sorry. Victor shook his head wildly. No. Another section of gravel gave way beneath his feet. His grip weakened. Elena, he screamed. Her fingers slipped slowly from his grasp, and in the next instant, she was gone. The darkness swallowed her completely. Victor collapsed onto the road, screaming into the storm. The ocean continued crashing below the cliffs, indifferent to the tragedy that had just occurred. Hours later, emergency crews searched the coastline, but the violent storm made rescue efforts nearly impossible. Victor sat silently in the back of a police vehicle, soaked and shaking. His mind replayed the final moments again and again, her hands slipping away, her voice whispering goodbye. Days later the storm passed. The ocean became calm again, but Victor's life never returned to peace. He left the coastal town soon after. The house by the cliffs remained empty. Years later, people in the town still spoke quietly about the tragic love story of the older man and the young artist. Some called it a beautiful romance. Others called it a warning. But for Victor, it was something far more painful. It was a memory of a love that burned too intensely, too quickly, and ultimately destroyed everything it touched. Because sometimes love crosses boundaries that the heart cannot survive. And when passion ignores reality, even the deepest feelings can lead to disaster.